morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Friday. Foreign direct investments reached a record high in 2021.
At least 30 transport groups are planning to stage a transport strike that's next week as they press the government to mitigate the impact of soaring oil prices. The LTFRB appeals to these groups to not proceed with the planned transport holiday.
The Budget Department releases a total of 3 billion pesos in subsidies and discounts for PUV drivers and agricultural producers.
And the Labor Department says it will review petitions seeking to increase the daily minimum wage to 750 pesos. We begin our broadcast with foreign direct investments hitting an all-time high in 2021.
The Bangko Sentral says this reflects an improvement in investor sentiment on the country on hopes of a rebound from a pandemic-induced downturn. Data from the BSP shows that FDI net inflows reached more than $10.5 billion last year. This was 54% higher than the $6.8 billion recorded in 2020. The 2021 figure also surpassed the previous high of $10.3 billion tallied back in 2017. In December 2021 alone, FDI net inflows surged by nearly 60% to $1.1 billion. Recall that Metro Manila and other areas across the country were placed under a more relaxed alert level 2 from November to December, allowing more businesses to operate at an increased capacity. Economists said investors were also more bullish on the Philippines after the passage of the CREATE law, which slashed corporate income taxes.
Now on to some updates on soaring oil prices. At least 30 transport groups are eyeing to halt operations next week to pressure the government to immediately address the impacts of the skyrocketing fuel costs.
The government says it is now looking to double the fund for fuel subsidy, but operators say this is still not enough. Shaila Francisco with the report.
4 transport groups are postponing their petition for a fare hike despite the series of oil price hikes in the past weeks. This comes after the Transportation Department's assurance that the 2.5 billion peso fuel subsidy will be doubled. The DOTR will also include traditional jeepneys in their service contracting program.
O andyan na ang mga subsidy na yan, mga service contracting, totally atrasan namin yan.
However, Liga ng Transportasyon at Operators sa Pilipinas will continue their 6 peso fare hike petition. If approved, this will result in a 15 peso minimum fare. The group says the fuel subsidy being offered by the government is simply not enough. They said the payout cannot cover the net increase in oil prices and will do little to address the rising costs of other commodities. Other transport groups agree.
Hirap na po talaga. Karamihan po sa mga driver namin, halos hindi na matunan yung pangangailangan ng pamilya.
With this, transport groups are calling for the amendment of oil deregulation law as well as suspending the VAT and excise tax on petroleum products. If this doesn't happen, over 30 transport groups warn that they will halt operations next week.
Hindi ito isang threat.
The DOTR appeals to these groups to reconsider as this would only affect the riding public. But the department is also ready to impose penalties if needed. For its part, the Finance Department insists that suspending fuel excise tax will result to foregone revenues and will only slow down economic recovery. Shaila Francisco, we are One News.
The LTFRB is appealing to transport groups to postpone any planned transport strike or tigil pasada. Speaking to the big story, LTFRB Chairman Martin Delgra notes that millions of commuters will be affected by these transport strikes. Delgra assured transport operators that the agency is now coordinating with the Budget Department for the early release of funds for fuel subsidy. However, the LTFRB is also not in favor of the proposed fare hike, saying the government does not want to pass the burden of the oil crisis to the riding public.
We would like to appeal to the transport group, especially for those who are catering to the millions of commuters. I'm referring to the PUJ as well as the tricycles, and for which kung pwede, ipagpaliban yan. Kasi may ginagawa yung gobyerno.
The Budget Department has released 3 billion pesos for fuel subsidy and discount programs. The majority of the funds will be allocated for the Transport Department's fuel program. Now, under this project, financial assistance amounting to 6,500 pesos will be directly provided to more than 377,000 qualified drivers, while 500 million pesos will be given to the Agriculture Department's fuel discount program for farmers and fisherfolk who own agricultural or fishery machinery. Eligible individuals or organizations will receive a maximum discount amounting to 3,000 pesos. Again, $500 million of that 3 billion pesos released by the Budget Department will go to the agriculture sector's fuel subsidy for farmers and fisherfolk. Is that enough to soften the blow of the oil crisis in our food producers? Let's get answers from Agriculture Assistant Secretary Arnel de Mesa. Good morning, ASEC. Arnel, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Jess and Danny. Good morning to all viewers and listeners.
Okay, to help us better grasp as to how this is going to impact the agriculture sector, can you give us an idea here, ASEC, ano ba yung percent share ng fuel cost sa total production cost ng farmers natin and also our fisher folks?
Normally, it's about 15 to 30% of the total production cost involve the cost of fuel and other related expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, how quickly does that affect the price of the agricultural products? Every time there's an increase in the oil prices.
Most of our activities in the farms involve the use of machineries as well as in the processing. So definitely it will have an impact on the pricing of our agricultural commodities. But because we have now 500 million initial fuel discount voucher, and the economic development cluster in one of the meetings previously held announced an additional 600 million pesos that can be provided hopefully within the month of April.
Sir, which po are the specific agricultural products that might have this spike in prices?
The fishery sector, because they are using the bangka, the boat, they are using definitely the fuel, and definitely it will have an impact on our fishing industry. Also, practically all agricultural commodities are using also, again, from their farming activities up to processing, they're using fuel, and definitely it will have an impact again on our agricultural commodities.
Sir, final question on the price issue. Are you talking with the DTI on possible price caps for the consumers?
This will be discussed internally among the department, and we are also closely coordinating with DTI. So for prime raw commodities, it's the Department of Agriculture is in control as per the price control law. And you are correct, we are coordinating with DTI for other agricultural products.
Okay, given that as well, sir, of course, like what we reported earlier, there's going to be a fuel subsidy for farmers and fisher folk here that's amounting to 500 million pesos, at a maximum of 3,000 per farmer or organization. Have you completely ironed out the guidelines? How many farmers or food producers are set to benefit from this? And when is the earliest that they can expect the dole-outs?
Yeah, Secretary Dar has already signed and issued the implementing guidelines for this fuel discount voucher. We're expecting it to be released in the next 1 or 2 weeks. And as you mentioned earlier, it will be about 3,000 pesos. And our partner is the Development Bank of the Philippines. And it will be issued through a card that will be given to the individual farmers and fishers. And they can use it to withdraw the gasoline every time, then the amount will be deducted from the initial 3,000 until it is fully consumed.
Okay, sir, again, how many farmers, how many individuals are we expecting to benefit from this program? And at the same time, I mean, very uncertain as to how long this crisis is going to extend. So given that as well, is this going to be a one-time thing, yung subsidy na to, or is this going to be more of a recurring program that at least you are thinking of employing for our farmers?
Under the general appropriations for 2022, 500 million was initially allotted. So about 160,000 farmers and fishers will be benefiting from this amount. And with the inclusion of additional 600 million, we're expecting more than 300,000 farmers and fishermen will be again benefiting from this program. And there are also other programs that we are implementing now, just like the Rice Farmers Financial Assistance. That's about 8.9 billion to be distributed this year for rice farmers tilling 2 hectares and below, and also registered in our registry system.
Sir, apart from the fuel subsidies in these times, what else could we do so that this impact of the volatile oil prices will not hurt our farmers in the future? Are there any other means for them to be self-sufficient, for us to be less dependent on imports in this sector, or is this just inevitable in this specific case?
The number one concern of the department is on the fertilizer, because fertilizer is a byproduct of fuel. And we know for a fact that Russia is the number one supplier of fertilizer, especially urea, on the global scale. Though the Philippines is not directly importing from Russia, we're getting our fertilizer mainly from China, Indonesia, and Malaysia. But on the global supply, we will definitely feel the brunt of this problem in Russia and Ukraine. So the government now is aggressively pursuing balanced fertilization, looking as well as on other alternatives. We are talking with our bilaterals for additional supply of fertilizer. But on the local side, we are increasing our production of organic and biostimulants, again, to revive the life of the soil, to bring them to a level that we can produce more.
Okay, very interesting.
So ibig sabihin wala naman tayong any fear of a possible shortage when it comes to fertilizer, at least for the near term.
For the near term, we're still okay, but definitely because of this problem with Russia and Ukraine, the government now is looking for other alternatives.
Sir, final question. Are we okay with the other issues that were there pre-war in Ukraine? I'm talking about ASF, and there's also bird flu. These were affecting the prices even during the pandemic.
The department is now facing lots of challenges. You're correct. We have the African swine fever, now the Asian avian influenza, and COVID-19 is still there. But at the early start of pandemic, you will see that the agriculture sector is very resilient. We're still growing despite of these issues. And on the ASF scenario, we are now looking at lesser areas, barangays, municipalities that is affected by ASF. So, and with additional budget, about 5 billion pesos for the livestock, specifically on the swine industry, we're expecting beginning third and fourth quarter, the swine industry will bounce back and will be on the positive side.
Thank you for those updates, Department of Agriculture Assistant Secretary Arnel de Mesa. Thank you, sir.
Now we're going to pause for a quick break. Right after that, with the effects of skyrocketing oil prices expected to spill over to basic goods, the Labor Department says it will review petitions to increase the daily minimum wage.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Dani Laurel.
The Labor Department is now studying the possibility of increasing minimum wage as rising fuel prices spill over to prices of basic goods and commodities. Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello says there's a pending petition both before DOLE and Congress to increase minimum wage to 750 pesos. The daily minimum wage varies per region, and at present the amount is 537 pesos per day in Metro Manila. Bello says he already instructed all regional wage boards to send in their recommendations by next month.
Based on the review, they can recommend wage adjustment. Meron ng pending petition for wage increases. In fact nga, merong isang petition not only addressed to us but also addressed to Congress, petitioning that the minimum wage should be increased to 750 pesos per day.
The Employers Confederation of the Philippines is also echoing calls for a possible wage hike. The group is in favor of the move as long as it goes through the right process and the proposed amount will be thoroughly discussed. ECOP admits, however, that not all employers could handle increasing their workers' wages.
Alam natin, hirap lahat, no? Pero dapat i-consider yung kalagayan ng mga micro-employers. Dapat talaga ayudahan ng gobyerno para kung talaga gusto magtaas ng minimum wage. Yung bawas ng taxes, bawas incentive, bibigyan ng incentive yung mga pautangin yung mga micro na gusto para makapag silang tuloy yung negosyo.
Dan, the European oil supply brought equities back up yesterday, but you also have trade data which came in this morning and a lower than expected export print and ballooning deficit in January. Tell us more.
Absolutely, Jess. Like you mentioned, we do have trade data here. January exports were up by 8.9%. However, that was actually lower than what economists were expecting or hoping for, which was 12.7%. And this as imports rose 27.5% year-on-year to 10.7 billion pesos. Again, lower than the estimated imports jump, which was 32.8%. And if you take a look at our trade deficit here, you're going to be seeing, quite a swell or a balloon. Our trade deficit for the month of January at $4.7 billion. At least this one, Jess, because of course we had lower imports, lower exports, is lower than the estimated trade deficit of $5.2 billion. Nevertheless, you're going to be seeing our index taking a bit of a hit here. We are down by 0.8% after we were already back to 7,100 levels yesterday. This rebound happened as the oil prices dropped overnight. Globally, the most in nearly 2 years. Now recall that yesterday what happened, there was the OPEC, especially the UAE, a member of the OPEC, said that it supported pumping more oil into the market due to the supply disruptions on the sanctions of Russia. And that actually pared back the prices of oil, and also the stocks seem to have rebounded. That does not seem to be the case this morning. And Jess, earnings season is still in full swing, and we did have San Miguel report their earnings yesterday. That is trading up by 1%. They did mention that 2021 saw their profit return to near pre-pandemic levels. Food and liquor sales were rising and oil business turned around. Of course, we reported already on Petron. The Conglo has a net income which more than doubled. That was 48.2 billion pesos. Revenues up by 30% to 941.2 billion pesos. Another one we need to watch out for is Emperador. You can see the year-to-date here and how that has slumped in just the past few days. And this was on the back of some, speculation here that their Singapore listing might not be happening. That's according to AP Securities. Another concern for investors is that the margins of Emperador might suffer from the spike in commodity prices. Of course, they do produce alcohol, which does have several commodities there. And they did, however, mention that their earnings will still be stable profitable because they have very little exposure in the Russia and Eastern Europe markets. Another thing they say is that the Singapore listing is still on, and that is bringing their price up by 2.1% to 14 pesos and 54 centavos. And finally, last quick check on Nickel Asia, which had also reported their earnings yesterday. Let me pull out the chart for you. Nickel Asia's 2021 net income, that is 7.81 billion pesos. That is up by 92% on the back of revenues in 2021 surging by 26%. Nickel Asia, however, going against the other two companies, that's down by 2.7%.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Heads up, Meralco customers expect higher bills this month as generation charges go up. This comes on the back of an increase in spot market prices and the peso depreciation. This translates to a 13 peso increase for residential households consuming 200 kilowatt hours per month. Households consuming 300 kilowatt hours will see monthly bills rising by 19 pesos, while the increase is 25 pesos for those consuming 400 kilowatt hours.
Vehicle sales increased by 17% month-on-month in February, although the year-on-year comparison still showed a decline of more than 7%. In their joint report, CAMPI and TMA recorded nearly all vehicle categories showing a sales decrease from last year, with the sole exception of light commercial vehicles. Now, month-on-month, sales growth was strong for most vehicle types. 6 of these 7 categories showed double-digit growth, with trucks and buses registering the biggest increase of 31%.
Converge ICT said its GoFiber app has been compromised by a data breach. The company said only a small portion of its customer base was affected by the breach. Loris Tuason, the company's data protection officer, said unauthorized third parties attempted to view the personal information of Converge subscribers. Apart from the potential unauthorized viewing of the personal information, Tuason said there is no evidence that any sensitive information has been misused. But to be sure, the National Privacy Commission said it is already looking into the data breach. And that's a first look into the business today this Friday, March 11, 2022. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.